or we'll just grab them. Actually, if the panelists could grab the chairs, I'll introduce everyone. That's how we can make efficient use of our time. Sorry, you have to work for this panel. All right, so everyone, we're looking very much forward to sharing a lot about everything that we've worked on with SEAL as well as individual audit firms. So my name is Michael Lewellen. I work as the head of solutions architecture at Open Zeppelin, where I do a lot of high-level security work with our top clients. Joining me will be Mehdi from Sigma Prime. Sigma Prime is also a very well-known audit firm and also a maintainer of Lighthouse, one of the major Ethereum clients. We have Alejandro, who works at Immunify, one of the major bug bounty platforms, as well as an audit competition platform. We have Yannis from DDoB, who also does audits and has a very good security scanning tool. And Josselin, who is from Trail of Bits. We only have, OK, that's all right. I'll stand. You guys sit. Hey, I got a podium. Oh, never mind. Perfect. All right, just-in-time chairs. All right, and last but not least, Josselin from Trail of Bits, another very well-known audit firm in the space, as well as a long-standing traditional security firm working with the US government, telling them how blockchains might be taken down by nation states, just in case they have to do that. All right, so we've got a load of questions I prepared, but we're going to keep it pretty free-flowing. If we have time, we'll take some questions from the audience. But just to set it up, the idea of this panel is, even though we all are effectively paid to tell our clients one way or another how to write their code more securely, at the end of the day, it is a business relationship, which means that we have to be careful about just how far we go sometimes in our feedback. Sometimes there are things that we are repeatedly seeing with clients, or maybe multiple clients, that we see as a problem. We probably still provide that feedback, but at the end of the day, the client is free to choose how they implement the code, and while we might still insist on our vision of things in the report, there are always limits potentially to that and how far we can go, as well as the fact that this is sensitive information. It's something that, if we do have a problem with the way a client implements something, we can't publish about that if it's something that is sensitive and confidential. And that's not to say that this is always like the limiting factor on that problem, but it's just, we see growing trends in clients, we see particular issues just in the industry, and this panel is kind of an opportunity to sit down and talk about that. So I guess what I want to do is just kind of go down the row, give everyone a chance to give their own maybe introduction, but then also say, like, if there's one thing that you've seen out there that you've seen in a lot of your audit clients that you wish would change, or something that you think has become a common trend in the industry in the last couple of years, what's something you've seen, and why do you think that's something that we should be looking to address? So I'll start with you, Josselin. OK.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, so I work at Trail of Bits. If you don't know Trail of Bits, we are a security company where we specialize in high-end security technology. We are working with blockchain clients, but also with traditional application security, cryptography, and so on. I think one of our kind of differentiation is that we spend a lot of time doing research and open source tools. You might know Echidna, Slither, or Medusa, which are tools that we have been built over the past years. Now, to answer to your question, what of one things I think people might kind of like not think about when they think about security audit or security review is that security is not going to be solved by external provider. Like any one of us is going to help your team, is going to help your company get better at security. But at the end of the day, you own security. Like if you are building a protocol, if you are building a project, security is your responsibility. If you think security external provider is going to own security for you, you are not going to need to make it in the long term.
Yeah, Mehdi, co-founder, director of Sigma Prime, blockchain security and research firm, security assessments throughout the entire stack for Web3 protocols, and also proud founders and maintainers of Lighthouse. Shout out to the Lighthouse team who's been doing a tremendous job over the years, powering about 33% of the Ethereum network today. One thing that I see too often, unfortunately, is it's kind of echoing what you've been saying, Josselin, is that people think that they're OK to launch straight after a review from us, just because we've reviewed a smart contract. So there's two things here. I think the fact that a lot of protocols still rely solely on on-chain security to protect their users is obviously really dangerous, right? We've seen what happened a couple of weeks ago, Ragent Capital, a few months earlier with other centralized exchanges. In fact, the vast majority of the hacks happening these days happen through standard Web2 security malpractices. So that's something I work hard to try to change with our clients, getting them to realize that security goes way beyond on-chain and smart contracts exclusively. We're getting there. I think we're making progress, but it's a slow and long fight. And just echoing what Josselin was saying, we're in fact completing a review right now for a protocol that is awaiting our report to go live, right? These engagements are all time-boxed, mind you. The more time you give us, the more likely we are to find bugs, right? We've got a finite amount of time. Projects have a finite budget. We can't, keep searching for bugs for years, right? We have to call it at some point. If we keep finding critical vulnerabilities until the last day of the engagement, chances are if you give us a bit more time, we'll find more critical vulnerabilities. So what I've been noticing is projects just awaiting the final report to go live, and that is terrible. That is absolutely terrible. Just like Josselin was saying, it's your responsibility. You're launching that thing, not us. So it's really important that you own the security aspect of your protocol. Get external security assessors, of course, but that's not it. You have to really do your own due diligence, and we'll talk about some of that stuff, I'm sure, in a bit.
Hey, I'm Alejandro Munoz McDonald, Unsafe Call on Twitter, and I'm from Immunify. So I'm a triager at Immunify. I've been with Immunify for a little close to 3 years. So I see a lot of the reports that are going through our platform to projects about these live vulnerabilities that are being fixed before they're exploited. So on that question, kind of related to what Mehdi said about what mistakes we kind of see. One of the mistakes is just inheriting ownable and using only owner for every single function for access control. So, jokes aside, I do see a lot of projects taking that level of centralization for granted. And while it typically isn't something that's accepted as like a bug or a mistake in an audit competition, it's something that I feel like doesn't get the attention that it really should. So, projects obviously should be practicing that principle of least privilege, and as well as consider that threat modeling for the accounts that are given that access. So, projects has kind of signaled pretty strongly, at least on the audit competition side, that they don't really care too much about centralization risks, but which I can somewhat agree with. But we then have to ask ourselves, at what stage do we consider that?
Okay. I'm Yannis Maragdakis. I'm co-founder of DDoB. We're a security company. We have a decompiler that you may have used for deployed EVM contracts. Getting to the question of the panel here, I think I have to very strongly agree with everything that has been said. First of all, the message that security is your responsibility when you're being audited, that's the strongest message you can have. That's the most unpleasant truth about security. We don't own security as auditors. You are the owners of security. If you get a report from us, if you get any bug report, any idea of a bug, you're supposed to generalize from that. You're supposed to ask yourselves, why was this bug introduced? Why didn't we think about that ourselves? What can we do to generalize the experience to other parts of the code? And in the end, everything is time-boxed. An external provider can only do so much about your security, and they're not the ones to suffer the most if you get hacked. So ownership of security is absolutely the number one unpleasant truth. The number two unpleasant truth follows from the time boxing is not all audits have the same confidence. Although we want to always leave an audit with having high confidence about the code, high confidence is still a variable. The time boxing is much more important than the highest confidence. So the better stage you can leave your code in, your code and all the other artifacts, including test cases, documentation, et cetera, the more opportunity you give your auditor to have extremely high confidence. Those are kind of the two obvious truths. I just wanted to bring them up to begin with, and we can get into more entertaining anecdotes a little later, I guess.
All right, thank you all. Definitely 100% agree with everything that was said. I hope a lot of people here who are in a similar industry agree as well. I think just generally speaking, making sure that we're not putting all the onus on the last security step, especially when sometimes, this is not every client, but sometimes occasionally you have that client that is asking for a review and you realize that you're actually the first person to review that pull request other than the developer that wrote it. And then you have to wonder maybe that there should be some additional steps and checks before then. So given that, as well as a lot of other things that should probably be done between the code being written and an auditor or an external security review happen, what are things that you've seen? And this I'll just open up to anyone, or we can go down if everyone has thoughts on this. But what's one thing you see where you're you are not ready for an audit? You should go back and do a lot of other basic things before you pay me to look at your code and tell you all these things, knowing that no matter how much time you give me, at the end of it, you're still not going to be ready to deploy.
I'm sure we all have heaps of.
Yeah, we'll start from that and come back.
So number one, if there are obvious security vulnerabilities at the design level, I mean, you're not ready for an audit. If someone can find a flaw in your business, in your fundamental design, that shows that you haven't thought about things from a security standpoint, even when you were designing the protocol, you're not ready for a code audit. I don't care how great your coders are. What can these flaws be? Things that suffer from obvious, say, replay attacks. You create a protocol, it's supposed to be doing something, it's supposed to be sitting as an intermediary, as a middleware somewhere, and it suffers from obvious replay attacks. You haven't even thought about that, because the API, the way you designed it, is flawed in that way. You have never thought of what you can do there. That's just an example, but it's the most telling sign that you're not ready yet for an audit, that you haven't thought about security when you were putting together your design or even your business proposal, when even you were going to investors. Sometimes you haven't thought about security. And we've seen some instances of that. So that's a very hard message to give to a client, right? To go and tell them, look, this is not just broken, it's fundamentally broken. So before you go for an audit, please try to think critically of your protocol from a design standpoint. And by critically, I mean try to think a little bit as an attacker.
So the answer you might get from the client is, so you're saying I can't deploy next week, so it's going to take another 2 weeks, right?
I do have a slightly different perspective. And I think you can go through an audit or a security review, whatever you want to call it, from the moment you are ready to receive feedback. You don't need to wait for your code to be finalized. You should actually seek for feedback early on, because security provider might help you with the design. They might help you, at an early stage of your project, depending on how long you are going to develop your project. If it's 3 months, probably you're going to wait at the end. But if you are building something for a year, it is probably worth to have checked over time and getting feedback. So I think from my perspective, you should seek security review from the moment you are willing to get feedback.
If you give it for free, everyone will follow your advice.
Yeah, I mean, it can be a paid engagement. We can do that, at a different stage. But from the moment you're OK, the decision I'm going to take now are going to have an impact in the long term. This is where getting feedback is really important.
As long as the expectation is OK, you're not going to be ready to deploy immediately.
Yeah,
but you know what stage you're at.
Yeah, expectation is really important. If you're halfway through your development, maybe some functions are not written, maybe you don't have access control, maybe you haven't figured out how you're going to do your year-end strategy, whatever. If you are OK to receive feedback from other components and you have the right expectation of what you are waiting and what you are going to receive, I think it's a good time to go through that process.
If I may, I think the key word here is expectations.
Yeah.
Just managing expectations on both ends. I get some of my testers get frustrated sometimes, and also some of our clients. They can seek early feedback, very early feedback, and that's usually quite healthy for the protocol. But the problems arise, and I think that's what you're probably referring to when the pressure comes from the business level, the executive level. We need to launch this week or next week is a good example. Everyone is rushing to launch their latest upgrades or latest protocols before DevCon. and there's a lot of pressure on those developers and deployers to ship. So it's all about managing expectations, but I can certainly relate to what you were saying, Yannis. It's quite painful sometimes. And to go back to your original question on what I've seen that kind of made me smile, and I just sort of shipped back, sent the client back essentially. It was this lending protocol, shall remain unnamed, came to us for a security assessment, thousands and thousands of lines of Solidity code, terrible code by the way. And they barely had any tests, barely had any unit tests. So what we do at Sigma Prime, I guess that somewhat differentiates us from the rest of the security provider space, is that we write our own tests. We don't trust our clients' tests, particularly when they're written in JavaScript. So we deployed the protocol locally and literally just tried to deposit stable coins and withdraw them. And that didn't work. That failed. So going back to your question, that to me was just a massive red flag. Obviously, you haven't done any testing, let alone end-to-end testing. And it's a very tough conversation to have, back to what you were saying earlier. This is a commercial arrangement, right? We're getting paid to spend time to review your protocol. So we'd like to think that we're quite intellectually honest. And instead of chewing through budget and wasting our client's budget and wasting our time, we just call it. And we're like, hey, I'm just going to pause this. We're not going to charge you for the remainder of the engagement fee. You're going to go back, do what you need to do, and then circle back whenever you think you're ready again. But it's quite challenging because there's obviously scheduling issues that arise. We're not a massive team, so we've got a bit of a backlog to go through. But I'd rather do that than waste my client's money and my testers' time.
Makes sense. One more.
Yeah. I was just going to mention, having those audits be part of the development process and pipeline rather than an afterthought or a final review before you go and get deployed. Like having that security consulting when you're developing the architecture of the application in the very beginning is super important, especially for also audit competitions. When you're going into an audit competitions, you're not typically going to have people debating the root of your design of the architecture of the application. People are just finding bugs, right, in your app, in your DeFi app. So you could, if you go audit competition or audit, and you can end up with the kind of a ship of Theseus of code where the parts have all changed, but the design is the same, and that might be flawed.
Yeah, I think I'll add one counterexample that kind of sets expectations. This is actually the opposite problem. This is like the code is too clean. Why do you want an audit? Where we have gotten people that came to us. Have anyone here used like opens up and contract wizard? Like just spits out an ERC20 token, comes from the library. Most people will just take the library on face value. We've had people come to us say, like, we literally use the contract wizard. The output is exactly the same. We've changed nothing, but we want you to do an audit on this. And we're like, well, it's our code. And it's 100 lines of code, and it's going to be kind of expensive because we usually don't do very small audits like this. But they're like, yeah, the exchange needs an audit, which is ultimately what they're sometimes a certain part of the business is going for. The security value of like actually getting that feedback isn't what they're looking for. They're looking for the stamp of someone said this is safe. Even though if someone spent 5 minutes looking at that and knew basic Solidity, they'd be like, oh, this is just a normal token. So that's the challenge on both sides. Even though that's still a better example, I'd rather have someone who doesn't need an audit get one than the opposite. But that's usually a challenge we've seen. One quick plug, I guess I'll say, or here's maybe the next thing I would say is Seal Frameworks has obviously been trying to do a lot to put a lot of best practices in front of people, hopefully in front of people before they're going for an audit. So a lot of the things that we might be getting paid in the last stage to tell them to fix when it is most expensive to fix, they can be incorporating early on. So, I mean, obviously, we would plug Seal Frameworks because most of us have been involved in that. But what are other things that you wish clients were required, would be required reading for clients before they ever come to you for an audit, or just things that you would insist that they absolutely should do before, even other than the obvious things like do testing, do other things, like maybe more specific things that you think isn't as common as it should be.
Sorry, do you want to perhaps mention or explain what Frameworks is?
Actually, I think you should explain what Frameworks is. You've been really in there.
Okay, so I invite you all to go to Mata's talk at DevCon. So I'm sorry, I forgot the actual date and time, but just look it up on the DevCon website. It'll be formally announced in a few days. This is an initiative that's really, really close to my heart. When it comes to security best practices in Web3, there's a heap of different resources out there, and it's quite difficult to know which ones are outdated, which ones you should be following, which ones actually apply to you. So we thought it would be a good idea to consolidate all of that and curate all of that information into one single website at the moment, and that's called Frameworks. So if you go to frameworks.securityalliance.org, it is live, and it's basically in the form of an MD book, Markdown, and it's got a lot of content. And you can filter the content that's applicable to you based on your role within the project that you're affiliated with. Say if you are a community manager, you will have sections around hardening your X account, your Discord server, your Telegram channels. If you are a developer, you can get detailed best practices in Solidity and other languages. Same if you're a DevOps person, secure DevOps, deployments, CI/CD hardening, all that cool stuff, which, again, we're not reinventing the wheel. All of that information is pulled from reliable sources, but it felt like we really needed this. I'm not sure about you guys, but I have a lot of clients that ask us, hey, what am I supposed to do here? I'm deploying, I've got EC2 instances on AWS. I'm deploying all this infrastructure, but I don't really know how to secure it. Now we can all point them to this one resource, frameworks.securityalliance.org. I'm really excited about this. Mata and Frederick have done a tremendous job in putting this off the ground. Yeah, sorry, I forgot your question.
So I guess in addition to that, any other things that we should be getting people to do before their audit, the specific things that might not be as obvious? I guess the one thing I would say is doing mainnet simulations as much as possible, especially if there's going to be a deployment involved, especially if there's an integration or an upgrade or anything that they're already relying on existing as it should on an on-chain context, like integrating with the known protocol. Sometimes interfaces don't line up, sometimes assumptions break, sometimes it changed from a year ago when you were first writing the code. But yeah, curious if anyone else has other things to throw into that.
I think actor modeling is something I don't see enough of, that I think is really important. So kind of like what actors are interacting with your protocol, which ones are privileged, the level of privilege there as well. I don't think I've seen necessarily a framework for that just yet that everyone is using, and I think that could definitely be something that would be really helpful.
Yeah, I think invariant development is probably something that we have seen a few teams doing, like using fuzzing, kind of writing down what is like the expected behavior of your protocol and trying to test it with different methods. We have seen a few teams doing that, and usually the teams that are doing it are kind of better in terms of security. But overall, like majority of the kind of team that are kind of developing smart contracts don't have this type of kind of technique and framework within their development process. And I'm hoping that with time we will get to a point where more people are writing invariants, testing them with fuzzing, testing them even with manual review. I think that will help a lot to understand what is supposed to happen with the protocol. If you're unfamiliar with invariant, it's basically, the idea is to define what your protocol is supposed to do. Like, for example, if you have an ERC20 token, you should not get to a point where someone balance off is above like the total supply. Like if you have 1 million token and like a user has 2 million token, probably something is going on. So if you can define like a list of 20 or even more invariant of your protocol and seek on how you can test them, you are going to get better overall in terms of security.
Yeah, very much. Strong vote of confidence for that. I mean, definitely do invariant testing as much as possible. We have amazing tool suites nowadays. You can do a lot of very good testing beyond basic unit testing. You can set up your entire environment to be pretty much a faithful simulation. And then if you do invariant testing, you're already ahead of the curve. That's wonderful. Still, there can be very mature code that has very deep bugs, even though it has excellent test coverage, just because there was a recent change that was not really, didn't really agree too well with the initial design. The initial design made some assumptions, then you make a late change. Like initially you were only accepting ETH, now you're accepting you're accepting ERC20 tokens, and suddenly all sorts of things break everywhere. And your test suite, even though it has excellent coverage, it has excellent coverage in terms of code paths, but it doesn't have excellent coverage in terms of the breadth of tokens that you can accept. So there are always caveats. There's always a certain tension there. In the end, it's all, again, up to you. But the shallow things that an auditor will look at are things like, do you have good test coverage? Because that is very much a strong indication of your code quality overall. And let's be honest, auditing is not about testing primarily, right? Auditing is about understanding the code in depth and forming a deep mental model. So the auditors focus on the code primarily. But when they see something that's not more normal, their first question would be, why is this not caught by test cases? Why isn't there a test case for that? Unless it's a very exotic scenario that obviously is a corner case, would never be touched by a normal test case. And that's really a bad sign if this could have been caught by regular functional testing of most of the code.
I think a good takeaway could be, if you're a founder and you want to go to deployments, you should aim for 100% test coverage. If you cannot reach 100% because maybe there is some condition that cannot be reached, you should have explanation and documentation. Don't go live if you don't have 100% test coverage. That's a really basic, simple rules, but no one follow?
Here, here. Yeah. If I may, there's two more things I'd like to add to that wish list. Dependency management. I don't see that enough. And I know for a fact one thing that keeps us up at night, security researchers, are supply chain attacks.
Yeah.
And I'm having this conversation last year with some SEAL members, and supply chain attacks seemed so far-fetched. Like, that's never going to happen to us. And we've seen a lot of examples since. So just being aware of what your protocol relies on in terms of external components and monitoring the, security posture of those components is really, really important. And echoing something Alejandro said around, and what you mentioned as well, Yannis, around known limitations. Today, you are, again, picking on lending pools, not sure why, but if your protocol does not support non-ERC compliant tokens, non-ERC20 compliant tokens, to not name names USDT. And all of a sudden, next year, you've hired new developers, you've let go of existing developers, and all of a sudden, these new devs have introduced support for USDT specifically. Having documented somewhere that limitation will help you down the line. So I think these two things, known limitations, dependency management, is something that I'd like to see more often. And something I slightly disagree with Yannis on is your take on auditors aren't necessarily testers. As I said, for us, we found that writing our own tests, whether integration tests, end-to-end tests, or fuzz tests, has allowed us to uncover some really intricate edge cases in critical protocols that would have gone unnoticed had we only relied on our manual review capabilities. Yeah, that's just how we roll.
I really like that you mentioned the ERC20 tokens that are supported because when we're looking at reporting and live vulnerabilities on chain, we can only support security researchers when a project has signaled intention to integrate that token either through governance or through documentation or something. So that's really important. If you're intending to add an ERC20 token, it really helps in incentivizing security researchers to disclose those issues.
Yeah, I'll actually add to that. We've found cases where we have effectively reported critical vulnerabilities, not because the code necessarily was insecure, but the way they had documented the way they would deploy the code would have led to a critical vulnerability. And we've had people debate that and say, well, we wouldn't have actually done it like that. We would have figured it out eventually. Yeah, sure. And I'm like, no, it's in it was in the scope. The documentation was in the code base. It's in the scope list. So. And we've also had cases where we've had clients that we've worked with for a very long time, and they have had a lot of turnover, and they're asking us like questions about their code base because the developers are so new, and we've actually had more experience looking at that code than they have, which is always a very stressful situation to be in because you're like, wow. Yes, we do know, but like if we're the ones stopping you from potentially doing unsafe behavior, you know, even separate from the security review, just like knowing what you're capable of, that is a little terrifying. So I guess like with that, like what are some cases where you've had clients like asking you to do things that are just so far out of scope for like what you think a security like firm should be doing, like just like weirdest requests? I'm kind of looking for some fun stories here, but also maybe some things that like signify areas where the industry needs help. Like, I mean, one example that we've seen is just like, unfortunately, incident response for like social media takeovers, which, I mean, granted, we have tried to help out there, and like shout out to SEAL 911 because they're the real heroes in helping in a lot of those scenarios, which is, we've just gotten to the point where we refer them to SEAL 911 because they're going to be the fastest and most effective at helping. But yeah, what are other cases where you've had a client where like, okay, you clearly have a security need, but we can't help you. You have to build this yourself, or you have to go to someone else that is more suited for this.
Yeah, I'm not sure I have like a specific example in mind. And one of the things here is that because we also work with traditional clients, like people working in Web 2, I do think we see more or less the same problem that we see in Web 2, in Web 3. So like some of the things that our clients are asking on the blockchain side are also some of the things we see, you know, in traditional application security, in cryptography, or this type of things. So I'm not sure there's really like one thing which is completely out of scope of what we can do usually. I don't know if you have...
You never had a client ask, can you just write the code for me?
Yeah, so I was just going to say,
Okay.
a very prominent L2 back in the days, this was 3.5 years ago. We've done a very long engagement. This is a massive L2 with a lot of TVL today. That engagement ran over the course of a couple of months. We found countless numbers of criticals and high severity bugs to the extent where they had to throw away the code base and start from scratch. I had a call with the co-founder and CTO, and he straight up asked me whether my team could just build the thing. Obviously, that's not what we do for reasons, primarily independence reasons. But I kind of echo what you're saying. We're comfortable diving deep into the stack when it comes to security, and we've had clients come to us for like, you know, web app security. It's not the most cost-effective way of securing your front end to go to Sigma Prime to do that, but if you want, we can take a look at that stuff. Same with securing your cloud deployments. There's plenty of great traditional security firms out there that can do a great job at that, but I understand that some founders want to leverage existing working relationships for that sort of stuff, and we're quite happy to oblige whenever needed. But yeah, what gets me is the, hey, can you just build it? Why don't you just build it? You broke it the first time, so.
Okay, that's a good point. Like we do have like, you know, partnership for things like, you know, web application kind of type of. We can do it up to some point, but we are probably not the most cost effective to do it. But yeah, even engineering, like for example, we have cryptographers that can build kind of an engineering protocol in terms of cryptography. For smart contract, it's true we might, you know, we have a couple of relationships with specific, you know, a company that does that. So yeah. Like usually, if we cannot do something, we know someone that can do it in a good way.
All right. Yeah. Another question I had was going to be, what are some interesting things you've seen like that clients think is secure but actually doesn't make a big difference, or maybe what are like common trends you've seen like where like okay, clients seem to be implementing this feature, it's adding a lot of overhead or it's doing a lot of things, but it's not actually addressing the core security issue. Like so what are some things that people think are secure but actually don't either make a big difference or really just aren't worth the effort? Anything in there, like what are overhyped security like features, implementations, and it's not necessarily you say they're a waste of time, but like there are other things you wish the client had implemented first, for example.
Multi-sigs with very low thresholds. That's something that, you know, projects automatically think, oh, I'm using a multi-sig, I'm protected. But you know, if you have a one of X multi-sig, you're just increasing your attack surface there. So, you know, understanding how to properly implement a multi-sig strategy, understanding, you know, again, threat modeling those actors that you're giving those keys to, like who has access to those private keys, where are they stored. You know, if you have even if you have an 8 of 11 multi-sig, and 7 of those keys are held by one person, or like on the same AWS instance, like you're just as insecure as.
We've seen that, by the way. This has happened. This exact example has happened last year.
That's actually a core problem. Like, there is no way to actually verify that keys are held independently. It's almost like you'd have to do a signing ceremony where everyone's like in person and like in a hoodie if they want to be anonymous or something, and still you can see, okay, everyone keep their hands away from the keyboard, and then this guy sign, and then this guy sign. I've seen people try to do signing ceremonies to protect for that exact sort of thing, and I've also seen, what was the other thing I had with multisigs that came up? Having a large multisig where the mass majority are not technical, because in effect, the majority of those non-technical people will just follow whatever the most technical person says, which means that your threshold really doesn't actually hold in practice.
So let me be devil's advocate for a whole bunch of things that we've said here. If it was up to an auditor or a security expert to say, is this code secure? Sign here. Or should this code go live? We would always say no, right? So it's not our business, and for us, our business is safety, not progress. So we are not going to make money off of the protocol being launched, so we want to be extremely conservative. So everything we've said so far is extremely conservative. And clearly, there are best practices from the security standpoint that are not best practices from a business standpoint. You cannot audit 17 different times until deployment because it exceeds your budget. Same thing like devil's advocate objection to multisigs. A one of n multisig, yeah, it doesn't make you more secure. It makes you less secure, but it's better than no multisig because in 5 months, it's convenient for now, and now what I want is convenience, and in 5 months, I'm changing my policy. And now it's 5 of 7, and the 5 are completely distributed all over the globe to independent partners. So it's not just one recipe and it's over. You need to take ownership of security. If you violate best practices, you know why you're doing it. You're doing it for convenience for now. And you keep in mind that my policy will be that later I will upgrade. So for anything that we say that it's good or bad, there's always a counterpoint that there are good reasons why people do these things in practice.
I think that's a good point. Are you consciously making a trade-off, or are you taking a risk without realizing there were better options in the first place? So I think we're at a good point to maybe take a few questions from the audience, see if there's anything that people want to ask panel, anything that you want to know going up to maybe your first audit. Any questions, really? Were that scary?
Oh, I see someone.
Hi, is an NDA a sufficient sort of start point for engaging one of you external auditors? Is that like a typical thing that clients do? Is that sufficient? Is there more? Like, as a founder, we're always kind of OCD'd about like giving out our code to strangers.
Yeah, NDA, like, as long as you interact with entity that, you have some trust with, like, should be sufficient, I think. Like, as long as, like, like the jurisdiction of the company you are interacting with follow whatever, you are trying to do, that should be sufficient, I think.
I'd say.
Yeah, unless I'm missing something.
Yeah, we're not lawyers, so clearly your lawyer will advise you as to whether the NDA is sufficient to protect you, but it's a very common step if someone wants to keep their code private. And I think what we do is something that most auditing firms do. We have a pre-signed mutual NDA, pre-signed on our end, so you just sign on your end, and immediately there's NDA on both sides. Typically, the auditor is fairly trusted. If you combine this with an NDA, which gives you some legal guarantees, the auditor is not going to go in competition with you. They're not going to launch a financial protocol to compete with you if you have a new idea. So the auditor is not who you should fear in terms of competition. In terms of confidentiality, especially if you also have an NDA, I think my opinion would be it's perfectly sufficient if you're worried about confidentiality of your code.
Andrew?
Oh, we have one more question?
Hello. Hey.
Oh, over there, okay.
So we were setting up the narrative that auditor is not liable for any loss, or the project is solely owner of their security. But do you think that if they have your recommendations and opt for all the security layers that you suggest, would you be able to take the responsibility that this project is secure enough to go live on production, and we can take it up from here that it's good enough to go live, and you can take the responsibility of being an auditor? I understand that with security, it's your reputation. When you pass an audit, it gets staked. But is there a time when you can take the responsibility by saying that, yes, we have fully audited it and it can go live on production? And second thing, you mentioned that case where they came and they don't have the test cases, right? And you send them back the lending protocol that you were talking about, right? And also you mentioned that you have to have a relation with the clients to make them more clear that Web3 security is not just on the on-chain, it's all on the Web2 side. So how would you, do you take any community initiatives to, instead of, shipping the client back, do you take any initiative to tell them that these are the things that we are going to take care of for you, for securing the project? Yeah.
The first question you had, which was the question of will we say this is safe to the exact wording is going to kind of be important. I would say if a client took every security suggestion that we gave them and implemented it to our satisfaction, we would say this client has implemented every security recommendation we could give them, and so in our opinion they have done as much as possible to be prepared for deployment, in our opinion. Would we say it is safe and it is ready for deployment? Maybe kind of imply it, but I think, I don't know, I'd be curious to know what other people think.
I can answer that. Not my code, not my call.
Yeah.
It's up to you. Your code, your protocol. You go live, you don't go live. It's entirely up to you. Not my call to make. Yeah. Second question. We can't do that for them, right? We can point them, we can explain to them the reasons why we're sending them back. The stuff that is missing, the stuff that we should expect to see that is not there. We can now point them to the framework's website and be like, hey, you haven't followed these sections. Please go back to the drawing board and implement these recommendations. But for independence reasons, we're really big on independence at Sigma Prime. We will never, ever come in and actually change your code base. What we can do every now and then is raise pull requests in your repository to add tests. And that is it. We will never fix your code. We will never add features. We'll never do anything that I think you're suggesting. So it's your code, your call as to whether you want to go live or not. It's your code, your call as to whether you want to increase your security posture before you come back to us. But that's just how we roll. Again, maybe other people have different takes.
We've done testing advisory. We've even implemented some tests for them as examples, but at the end of the day, they have to know how to build them and run them and maintain them and own them. If they're just oh, they ran because those guys gave us the tests and they're running successfully, so it must be safe, well, then that's not, we haven't done our job because then there's a lack of ownership. And we're not going to always be there to make sure those tests are running properly.
And security is not binary. It's not it's secure, it's not secure. It's kind of a spectrum where you can get as secure as you can. And yeah, I agree. Your code or your responsibility. It's the way it is.
All right, I think we're at time. So thank you to all the panelists for coming up. Thank you for all the work you're doing, both as commercial businesses, but also as contributors to initiatives like SEAL, coming to these conferences and sharing your thoughts. Look forward to the next panels that we'll have talking more about what SEAL's up to. Thank you, everyone.